There's a framework called the Hallmarks of aging that's used a lot in longevity. And Hallmarks of aging means there's certain characteristics, and there's 12 of them currently that are used. When they investigate whether it's humans or other animals, the levels of NAD decrease in our tissues with age. So not only do we need it, but it just turns out that as we get older, we have much less in our tissues and cells where we need it to counter aging than we did when we were younger.
So we talked about frank deficiency, which is obviously not the norm, but what are some signs of just waning NAD levels as we age? Like, say someone like myself, I'm 50 years old. What are some of the more common symptoms that we're seeing, or just presentations? And then how does that reflect into anti-aging or longevity?
Let's touch first on the longevity piece, and then we'll go backtrack into some clues maybe that you could need more. But in a general sense, there's a framework called the Hallmarks of aging that's used a lot in longevity. And Hallmarks of aging means there's certain characteristics, and there's 12 of them currently that are used, that whether scientists are looking at a mouse or a monkey or a human, we would have in common as we get older. And these are things like mitochondria dysfunction and DNA having issues replicating correctly, and telomeres becoming shorter and stem cells being exhausted. Another one is dysbiosis, which has to do with kind of the health and integrity of our gut. Another one's inflammaging is how we would usually refer to it. But that low level inflammation that gradually gets more and more with the passing of time in all organisms. And so NAD has been connected to all 12 of those, some much more strongly than others. So as an example, obviously you had mentioned earlier, Krebs cycle that takes place in mitochondria. NAD is critical for helping to counter that mitochondrial dysfunction. I mentioned its role in the enzymes that repair DNA, right? So it's really critical in that one as well. This new role of niacinamide in muscle stem cells is there's a connection now with not necessarily NAD, but it's precursor molecules with stem cells. And so there's a strong case to be made that we need NAD to counter all of these hallmarks of aging. And one of the other things that then came about from research is when they investigate whether it's humans or other animals, the levels of NAD decrease in our tissues with age. So not only do we need it, but it just turns out that as we get older, we have much less in our tissues and cells where we need it to counter aging than we did when we were younger. So that's there's many more nuances to that, but that's the main story, that it's super important for keeping us healthy as we get older. And for whatever reason, our cells aren't very good at making enough of it. And so there was a study, I think I saw it about 3 months ago, and it looked at compared NAD levels in red blood cells at different ages. And then with people that were either sedentary people, high-level runners. Some of the runners were long distance, some were more sprinters. And then looked at how NAD levels were over time. And no surprise, the exercises had, for whatever age they were at, much higher levels of NAD than the sedentary folks.
The runners had higher levels?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the sprinters actually higher than the long distance runners in this particular study. But even within those, it was like a line down over time with age. So they stayed higher, but they still went down. So exercise was useful, but it didn't counteract all the declines with aging that happened with NAD.
Wow. So why do you think it goes down over time? Is it malnourishment? Is it lack of precursors, or?
So I think there's multiple different reasons, but one would be tie in with inflammation. So there's another NAD dependent or NAD consuming enzyme called CD38. For listeners, just think of it as like a chronic inflammation enzyme. And that's a huge devourer of the NAD molecule as we get older. And some animal evidence would indicate on its own that that's sufficient to cause NAD levels to go down as we get older, like just that chronic inflammation piece. We talked about zombie cells the last time I was on. So senescent cells, it turns out, as we talked about then, accumulate more and more in our tissues as we get older, and they become big devourers of NAD. So they kind of rob NAD from their local ecosystem and devour it as well. So we have those two pieces. My guess is that some's probably dietary when you start to get to extremes of aging, right? Because people sometimes just don't make as healthy a food, as they get older compared to what they might have had access to younger. And then some part is for sure we're less efficient at turning the things like flushing niacin or NR into NAD. The enzymes that do the work, they don't work as well as we get older.
Wow. So inflammation is just, that's what I was trying to get at with the B vitamins across the board. When you're in a toxic and or inflamed state, you start to chew through your B vitamins. Well, all your nutrients, all your micronutrients and macronutrients too. You start to eat them up because that inflammation is just literally burning through them.
Yeah. And then I think that we'll probably find out that the gut microbiome has a lot to do with it as well.
I'm sure. Yeah. Absorption and just conversion in the gut. That's got to be a player.
The one research group has done 2 studies on it. Both were in rats, so that doesn't necessarily translate to humans. But what they found in those 2 studies, when they gave nicotinamide riboside orally, great NAD booster, that for that to work and boost NAD levels in the liver, certain gut microbiomes had to interact with it and turn it into the flushing form of niacin. And then most of what got absorbed from that lower part of the GI tract was the flushing form of niacin. And if they did things to eliminate those good gut bacteria, then NR wasn't as useful to boost NAD levels. So the other thing that's been super clear is that NR, niacinamide, flushing niacin all interact slightly differently with the gut microbiome. So think of the gut microbiome, which on average, maybe, yours has 5,000 different species. Mine would have 5,000. Some we would share, some would be different, but they're all depending on us for their food supply. And just like us, if they don't get enough of these precursors, they'll be deficient and have issues. So my strong suspicion is that with that, dysbiosis that occurs with aging, their gut microbiome's not doing the job it needs to do to optimize NAD levels in the body either.
I never thought about my microbiome being deficient themselves.
Yeah, they rely on us for everything. Like magnesium, right, is super important in all the energy production pathways. And if we're not getting enough, they're not getting enough. So,
yep.
And it's same with the B vitamins and the NAD precursors. So yeah, we're always eating for literally trillions.
It's true. It's true. I never thought I'm starving them as well. I always think of them as either alive or dead. I don't think of them as nutrient deficient. So, I don't want to starve my little bugs. I always say to eat an interesting diet so that it keeps it interesting for your biome, right? Your bugs need interesting food too. They need something to chew on that's different and unique and interesting along the way. If you feed them the same things every day, some of them die off because they're bored. I know that's not that simplistic, but that's how I describe it to patients. Cause I'm like, I don't know. I don't think you could live off of just only one food group. Like some of the, these extreme diets are popular online,
The microbiome is flexible within some constraints for sure. And, so really quickly, when we dramatically change our diet, you'll start to see shifts in maybe not what is there, but the quantity of it, right? Will cause certain ones to be outcompeted, so to speak. And, oftentimes over time will cause some species to go extinct. And we don't want that to happen. We want to keep a lot of diversity in our microbiome.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go back though. So we've got frank deficiency of, pellagra. And then there's this idea of just declining NAD levels, the hallmarks of aging. So that's what we're going to start to see. Those 12 things you listed. Those are the things, because people aren't going to know whether their mitochondria are working or not. I mean, they might feel symptomatic of something, but what are some things that one might notice?
Yeah, so I always work backwards from what are the good things we see when we give it to people, and what are the things where they tell us they notice the difference. And the most common thing, without question, that we've seen in our studies when we measure changes in NAD levels is people reporting more energy. Like, so not, energy in the ATP sense, but energy like anti-fatigue. Like there's something there, like, and maybe because we're making more ATP, maybe because more that, that dementia thing, right? That had to do with how our brain was functioning. So energy, feeling less fatigue, number one thing I see all the time. A second area that's super common is the mood category of things, right? So, and by that, I don't mean just depression or anxiety, but irritability, nervousness, again, like those cognitive things, because those mood things, really it's our brain that's, or the gut brain axis, but both that interact there. So that would be the other, number two big category, just better emotional resilience and feeling like our emotions aren't running away with us, that we are more the driver of the ship. And all these emotions are appropriate in the right context. It's just when they're starting to be our constant companions as opposed to when we need them to express themselves.
Dr. Greg is an expert when it comes to the fields of longevity, of senolytic cells, of regenerative medicine, and we've had him on the pod before.